thank you so much for joining us today for our second day of Jam Week. We have some amazing professionals here today. I can vouch for all of them. Absolutely fabulous women. You guys are in for a treat.
No pressure.
No pressure at all.
I was thinking that too.
Right. Hello, Professor Zadorek. Thank you so much for joining us today. Okay. All good, May?
Yes, this is not the first time I got kicked out of Zoom Link. So,
We're glad you're back.
yes, it's always handy to have like the link ready, and then so you can just always get back in quickly.
Yeah. It happens. It happens. Okay.
Just so you know that I don't think I'm seeing your screen right now.
Oh, you're not seeing the screen?
Or
Can anybody else see
maybe-
my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Everyone else is good? Okay.
Okay, I okay, so because I moved the speakers to the side.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay. So we have a comment from Professor Zadorek. Great to see everyone. Thank you for sharing your expertise with our students. Yes, thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. We're really appreciative of you sparing us your time and your knowledge, especially in this industry that we have such interest in as students of UTD. I know I'm really interested in data analytics, and May actually has real hella interest in the marketing analytics. So we are so excited to have you guys here today. Thank you so much. Well, we are at 4:05, and like I had said, we would give it a few more minutes, but we seem to be on time. So why don't we get started? Is everybody ready?
Yes, I'm excited.
Awesome. Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here today. We are starting off our second day of Jam Week with tech strategies in global mobility, focusing on the region of Asia Pacific and the Australia New Zealand region. So don't innovate or don't invent, innovate. And I will hand it off to May.
I'm gonna do a quick introductions because we do want to highlight our speakers today, so I'm not that important. But I'm the president of Global Mobility Club here at UTD. And if you guys attended the session yesterday, you guys know that I study global business and marketing double major. So that's why I have like a huge passion for the technology and automations, because I'm actually part of marketing analytics track. So I'm really excited for you guys and myself to learn about global mobility, tech in global mobility for in this section. Yeah. And I'll give it to Grace, our VP, amazing VP.
Thank you. So my name is Grace. I am the VP for the Global Mobility Club here at UTD. I am a global business senior with a minor in data analytics and business intelligence, graduating this semester, but this is my first Jam Week that I've helped put on, and I'm so excited for y'all to experience it. So thank you so much. And we can get into introducing our amazing professionals. So first up, we have Miss Nicelle Galeno, and she is a global mobility expert who has over 15 years of experience in human resource and global mobility. She has exceptional knowledge and skills surrounding mobility, strategy, risk management, and compliance. She was most recently awarded the Global Mobility Professional of the Year in the APAC region back in 2019. So thank you so much for joining us today, Nicelle.
Thank you for having me.
All right, and the woman who is notorious throughout the mobility sphere, we have Karen Mendez joining us, the Senior Global Mobility Specialist for Adobe. She has over 15 years or 16 years of experience in the mobility industry, spanning multiple regions, is currently supporting the Adobe APAC region. She is a multi-award winner and was recently awarded the 2021 Global Mobility Champion Leadership Excellence Award just last month. So thank you so much for joining us today, Karen.
Thank you, Grace. I was hoping when you said notorious, you were going to introduce Abby, but it's lovely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well,
It's lovely to be here.
Thank you so much. And as you said, Abigail is absolutely notorious as well throughout the global mobility sphere. She is truly a global professional and has lived and worked in England, Ireland, France, and is now in Australia. She has a background in mobility consulting and has recently held the position of the head of talent and career at FIS. She is a highly decorated individual as well, and most recently was awarded the Best Mobile Workforce Innovation in 2021 last month for her work and development of AI in global mobility supporting. So thank you so much for joining us today, Abigail.
Again, thank you for having me. I'm not sure any of us need the label notorious. It always has that connotation. I love that you're holding these sessions. I'm really excited to share the experiences that I've had.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, we can go ahead and get right into it. If anybody out here who is listening has any comments, anything that you're interested in hearing about, these lovely ladies are going to be leading us through this session. Feel free to drop in the comments what you're interested in, what you like to hear, what you don't, and we want to hear from you guys. So thank you for joining us all. So we are going to be starting off the session talking about the journey of technology in mobility. And Karen, I know that you have a really long history working in this industry, and I think you would be a wonderful choice to start this off. Do you have anything that you would like to start on? We would love to hear about some of the things, maybe early tech or versus today's tech. What are some of the differences that you've seen over the history, technology-wise?
Absolutely. Thank you, Grace. And thank you again for the lovely introductions. Yeah, I guess to set the scene for everybody watching today, I personally feel like technology in the mobility industry has evolved quite slowly, actually. If I reflect back on the methods that we used for tracking our mobile workforce 16 years ago, back when I first entered the mobility industry anyway, it was typically centered around Excel documents. I mean, we all still, some of us use that today, don't tell anybody, but typically it was 100% Excel documents. And that was often paired with manual processes that you had to then interface it with the organization's HRIS systems. So as you can imagine, it was quite clunky, quite time consuming, but fortunately it kept lots of us in jobs. So that was a good thing. But I guess the more sophisticated technologies then started to emerge, and they were coming to emerge outside of the external vendor scene. And it was usually spearheaded by the big fours, so your Deloittes, EYs, KPMGs, which meant they were largely all compliance focused, because if you think about those organizations, they often provide us with tax or immigration services. And so the platform design and functionality was used solely for the purposes of assigning management at the back end, so what we would use. And there was very little focus on employee experience. So there was no, apps or interface with the employee where they could kind of see what was going on. And if they wanted an update around their assignment or where their goods were, they would need to have a phone call or an email with us manually. Those platforms were often very expensive. They were usually based on a subscription and or an employee per use pricing model. And on top of that, you would also need to be a client of using those vendor services already. So you were already getting bills for tax services or immigration services as well. And if you weren't, you'd need to sign on and do that. So as I said, there was a lot of focus kind of around that compliance, and the solution itself as a standalone piece of technology just didn't exist at that point. Mm-hmm. Grace, if I fast forward kind of to today, we have, the complete flip side of that. We have technology companies who have had no origins, no background in mobility, coming through and designing mobility platforms and kind of learning the discipline and learning the industry on the run. not to say that's any reflection of their products, but you know, they're producing products now that are focused on the end user functionality, and most importantly, the employee experience, right? Because that's, you know, for all of us in HR or people or employee experience and leadership, we want to make sure that employee experience is front and center, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and so those types of technology then need to you know, come in and plug in with either compliance aspects, whether they're internally or externally, so that they're giving that kind of whole end-to-end solution. So those subscriptions or access those platforms can be on a standalone basis, and they usually plug into now your organization proprietary systems. And you know, they give you a lot more freedom to kind of pick a mix who you use from a vendor perspective, because they all seem to integrate these days, which is great. And they allow us to have a lot more flexibility in managing our mobile workforce. So I guess, oh, sorry, Grace, go ahead. No, jump in.
Well, I guess my question would be, how has it changed your day-to-day processes in kind of shifting in this more user-friendly ability of technology? Has it made it much easier, I'm guessing, versus the Excel spreadsheets?
Absolutely. I mean, look, as I mentioned at the start, compliance is always one of the big focus areas for any mobility professional. But I think what it's done really well, especially over the last 2 years, is it's helped us focus a lot more on the safety, health and well-being of the employees. So obviously when COVID started, many organizations found themselves in a position, and I know for myself as well, is like, oh dear, where is everybody? I need to get them back. And not just talking about transfers or assignments, which myself, Nicelle and Abby are used to managing more predominantly, but your business travelers as well, right? Who are far more fluid, who are not always governed by a mobility professional within their organization. They're sometimes often sat out to the side and sometimes even sit under finance. So the business travel program is where I see probably the most value around technology, because of that fluid nature of keeping up with where they are. And as I said, yeah, COVID was a great example of where technology came in and saved today.
So I guess then, about the transition post-COVID, are you seeing a lot more people who are kind of out of compliance with the shift to international remote work? And we were talking about it yesterday in our session, the number of people who are just wanting to go work on some island, and they're like, oh, I can go do this, you know, we're remote right now, but the implications that are there are not as easy as you would think. So
yeah,
what does that look like for you?
Yeah, look, it's for Adobe specifically, it's something that we're still working through. Most organizations, including Adobe, have taken a position around allowing employees broadly as a blanket rule to work internationally. And you would see more of those policies or what they look like from some of, you know, the big names in Silicon Valley. So Google, for example, makes lots of announcements around their remote working policy. For us here in Australia, Telstra, who's a big telecommunications company, also came out and made some positions around that. What I will say about those programs, certainly from an employee's perspective, when they're looking at those organizations, is read the fine print. So I guess from a back end perspective, when an organization is determining those kind of blanket rules around when someone can go and work in Barbados for, you know, a certain amount of time and take their laptop and have a great time, there's compliance is the first thing they look at, and there's lots of areas of compliance that you need to consider as an organization around that sort of stuff. So Nicelle and Abby will laugh when I say this, but PE, so permanent establishment, is a huge consideration. So that's a corporate tax angle that we need to look at. And then, you know, legal jump in with, you know, the entities that are set up around the world, how many they are. And so when an employee is seeing announcements from organizations to say, hey, you can work for 3 months from anywhere. Generally speaking, a lot of the time that's a domestic policy, and underlying or sitting complementary to that is an international policy. So you need to be really conscious when you're doing your PR around programs of mobility. You need to be really clear from an employee value proposition about what that actually means, because there are lots of different rules of thumb about what blanketly is permitted from a working abroad perspective. And I'm kind of referring to programs where there is little governance around it. So, for example, Adobe has a 15-day remote working policy, which allows individuals to go and work internationally from anywhere. And you know that doesn't necessarily have a lot of rigor around it from the perspective of, we don't drill down to every single person and understand, do they have working rights? Do they meet the tax obligations? That's a position that the organisation has taken. And as I said, lots of other organisations have taken similar positions, some with more days, some with less, but they've all made that risk assessment as an individual organisation.
So I want to circle back. Oh, yeah.
So I was just going to say, I might step in there just to sort of flesh out a little bit from a technology perspective. I think a lot of companies too are leveraging technology in that international remote working space. So there are many tools either, being developed by, Big Four or by some technology players that are sort of don't have that mobility background and are pure technology players that allow organizations internally or externally to run scenarios through these programs based on a certain level of criteria. But coming back to what Karen was saying, there needs to be an underlying guideline or program developed there. For them to be able to assess whether the individual can actually go on that remote working arrangement. So the programs and technologies will assess, whether the individual has working rights, how many days they can spend in the host country from an employment tax or a PE perspective. And the technology can run complex processes like, tax research, but things that would typically take, days or even weeks, it's really shortened through running it automated through these technologies. And that's sort of the way that we're working at the moment, and a lot of companies are moving to that way because, like Karen was saying, and I suppose you said yesterday that it came up as well, Grace, this is the new buzz, work from anywhere, remote working. So there needs to be automated processes and technology to support this.
The automation piece is really interesting, absolutely. And I know Abigail is all in on the automation, so please go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing, that the other opportunity is to link to other corporate systems for that more seamless experience, and also to reduce the number of man hours you need in your mobility team to try to identify and then manage that population. And so tying into things like your travel risk provider for data on people who are traveling, or a process where there's a travel approval request, those things can make it much easier for mobility teams to streamline and get on top of the risk that could be created. And I think that's much easier now, as Michelle says, with some of the offerings from Big Four firms and others to help manage that using technology.
Absolutely. And with the tools that you're seeing, are there multiple tools that you're having to work with and kind of merge together, or is there kind of like a shift towards a be all end all one tool that's size fits all?
I'm seeing different things in the market. So most of the Big Four have an offering that looks at tax and immigration for business travelers. I haven't seen anything that looks at personal travel requests yet, which is what we've seen a lot during COVID. This, I need to go and work remotely from here while I look after a sick relative, for example. But you can use the assessment criteria behind, but there isn't something that sort of sits above that to look at personal travel yet that I've seen. I'm seeing you can use multiple offerings. For example, at FIS, we used Fragment for the immigration assessment using their platform. And then we worked with EY to assess the tax risk. And the reason we did that is because we didn't want to make the employee concerned about the tax risk if we were just going to track their days against thresholds, because most of the travelers were never going to spend that amount of time in country and hit the threshold, but they were going to need to do the immigration assessment. Other companies have chosen the path of assessing tax and immigration up front and communicating that to the employee. So I think there's some flexibility around the tech offerings depending on the company policy.
Very interesting. It's cool to see how customizable it is for the mobility teams. They get to pick and choose what they need. So I want to say a quick shout out to Kat Kim in the comments. Thank you so much for commenting. And she says, it is a truly inspiring to seeing a representation of females in leadership roles. So I totally agree. It's amazing to see women in STEM. So kind of going off of that, what are some of the challenges that you've been able to solve through technology in your positions as leaders in these roles?
I'm happy to take that one.
Absolutely.
Estelle and Karen, I think it's a really exciting time to be in mobility. If I think about, as Karen outlined, what the traditional mobility approach was for a mobility advisor and what was available then to what is possible now, it's using technology, it's very exciting. So I think if I think about a couple of challenges that we've had at FIS, there's always that pressure on mobility teams to scale. And I think a lot of teams during COVID saw the need to scale down as suddenly travel stopped, as well as scaling back up. And that causes a lot of disruption for teams. You can lose staff during those times. You can undergo lots of intensive training to build up expertise in times of growth. So I think that, plus the really complex environment we're in, with rules changing daily around how you can enter a country, or the tax rules and tax breaks, it's never been more complex, and there's never been more pressure on mobility teams to deliver during this time. However, we also have massive advancements in technology that can enable this, and I won't talk about business travel because we've just spent a bit of time on that. But I think if I think about some of the pressures that are coming from the mobility team, it's also because our clients, so our employees and managers, are living in a world where everything is on demand. They can access everything on their apps 24/7. They can get what they need when they want it. And that is, for our clients, like FIS as a fintech, that's what our clients are demanding of our internal teams. And that's what our employees are demanding of us. And so these advancements in technology, where previously we might have had very traditional mobility policies with what you would expect, shipping, flights, immigration services, and so on, has been able to shift to introduce non-traditional benefits, such as when I arrive in country, I want my fridge stocked. I want some babysitting vouchers because I'm going to need to go out and home search. These are not traditional. They're hard to provide without a technology solution. And those are here now. And as Nacelle and Karen talked about, there's been a bit of a sort of dichotomy of who provides those services now. It used to be Big Four could give you your policies and run all your tax services and provide some of those relocation services. But tech companies are entering this market now, and they're very focused on the employee experience and what are those demands that are matching what everyone's day-to-day life is. So I think that is one of the solutions that helps, at least from an FIS perspective, two different challenges. One is this, what the employee is expecting from the experience. They want everything, all the information on their move in one place. They want it to be sort of specified in terms of dates. When do I need to do what, when? And they want that regardless of what time zone they're in or what location they're in. On the manager side, and again, I talked to FIS, we have lots of unique users of managers who send somebody on assignment maybe once every 5 years, or maybe just once. And so the upskilling that's required in a traditional mobility program to understand all of the policy types, all of the different options, the cost associated with each of those, and then you try to layer on candidate selection, who's the right person, what's the career path, and so on. We ask so much of our managers in that environment. But again, introducing technology in this way that delivers a different employee experience, it can also deliver a different manager experience too. And so one of the things that is exciting in the market at the moment is these flexible tools that instead of asking the manager to select all of the benefits that the employee should receive. Instead, think about the number of points they want to offer. And this is a tech-enabled solution. So the manager is thinking, okay, family size going from this region to this region, and this is the level of the individual. Maybe that's a range of, I don't know, 200 to 300 points. And the cost of those points is X. And yes, I can afford that in my budget. And not only that, I can easily plan for that in my budget for next year, because it's a simple process to go through. I need to put the cost of 300 points into my budget for next year. But the employee then in this tech solution goes into the platform, very engaging, lots of information around what it means to go on assignment, the location they're traveling to. And they see that they've got 300 points and they can allocate those. Of course, some of those points are allocated for things like immigration, tax briefings, which the company can set for compliance purposes. But the others, the employees can allocate based on what they feel is the most important. And in these solutions, they can also see using social, and I'm going to get this wrong, but it's basically social voting. They can see who has used that benefit before and what the rating is. It's a social rating. And so they have this much broader guided experience around, you know, yes, you should maybe think about shipping because you need to move some things, but then there are all these other things that is a guided tech experience available at midnight if that's the time they choose to look at it and so on. So I think that is going to really shift what is possible for employees and massively reduce the time it takes for managers to think. And as a mobility professional who wants to see more people taking up mobility assignments and transfers for leveraging the internal talent population more effectively as a manager and offering career development experiences, if it's simpler for the manager and they can plan ahead for that cost, we get more opportunities for people to move around the organization because it can be planned for.
Thank you, Abigail. As I'm listening to this, it's just amazed me that like how we're moving away from like the big four, and then there's so many more tech companies, like tech players, and offering, they're so good at offering like flexibility and like more advanced benefit package, just to enhance the experience of the employees and the managers. So I think this is the great takeaway for those of us like me and Grace and some of our audiences who are really interested in like learn like how technology plays out in global mobility. So we have like a really great question from our friend Kat. She asks, what are some best practices or trends that have seen success in promoting upwards mobility within an organization? With remote work and hybrid work environments, employees' involvement can decrease. So I think, Shell, like if you have or any of you who want to take that question, I think this is a really great one. Thank you, Kat.
Just rereading the question, May.
It should be in the Q&A chat.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we have a think about best practices or trends that we've seen success in promoting mobility, I really think it's around aligning mobility with the talent agenda. We want to, you know, not just move an employee from A to B because, you know, there's a particular project, but we really need to be making sure that we're actually capturing the objectives of why the individual's moving. And that can be promoted through the broader talent strategy. So identifying, you know, who your top performers are, potentially adding it through a career development program and succession planning, but also promoting it as a part of the organization's employee value proposition. You know, making sure that employees actually have opportunities for overseas work or overseas assignments. So I think in terms of best practice and where we're at the moment, if we think, you know, 10 years ago, it was we need to get a person over to, you know, Asia to resource a project. I don't think that those times are with us anymore. I think it's more around aligning to the talent strategy. And those are the sort of assignments and transfers that we're going to get the most out of as organizations as well, because it's going to have a meaning to the employee and meet with their employee experience. We don't want to just be sending someone on an assignment that's not right for them. That's where we have failed assignments or failed transfers. And again, if we think about cost efficiencies and you know, the long-term value add, that's sort of not where we want to be. Does that answer the question?
I agree with everything Nicelle said, and I think a couple of other things. I think candidate selection first up is so key to make sure that you've got the right person, and that can be, as Nicelle said, through succession planning activities. So you know, Nicelle is my successor. What are the gaps she's got between doing my role and the role she's doing today? How can we use mobility as a way of giving her an opportunity to develop those skills ahead of promoting her into that position? And talent brokering is another area. I think for organizations that don't have their mobility programs closely aligned or part of their talent programs, then mobility is often seen as a reactionary, business-driven, I need to move Joe from here to here, rather than a genuine talent lever and a tool for career development. And I think the other thing is planning for what happens to that individual after they finish their assignment, so that the experience that they've gained and the new skills they've learned can be celebrated at the end and then put to best use in other parts of the organization. And then the final thing is marketing that success. And I think there's a role for leaders here. This is not the mobility team driving this, though we can help with information and statistics and analytics, but there's a role for the leaders to champion that somebody has had this experience and here's now their career path that's open to them. But yeah, I think the mobility has so much to offer, and often it's kind of hidden under a bushel because it's not being championed in the right way.
100% agree.
Amazing. Kat says, outstanding responses. Thank you. Thank you so much for your question, Kat. If anybody else listening has questions or comments, please leave them in the chat or in the Q&A box. We'd love to hear from you. So I want to push us forward a little bit. Sorry,
I just, Kat had asked about remote working. Mm-hmm. And I know yes. Before, but I do think this is really important, that people who are working remotely don't miss out on the opportunity for these types of experiences just because they're not in the office. And we don't, I know that we might touch on this a bit later on, but I think there's a role here for managers to upskill themselves to be able to manage a population who are dispersed and make sure Absolutely. That they are, and I think, again, candidate selection and so on can help with that, but make sure that someone's not missing out just because they're not in the office.
The learning curve of shifting into a hybrid remote workplace for managers is something that we haven't really talked about. And that's definitely something that I would love to hear from you all on. Thank you so much for bringing that up. We can definitely bring in that. So our next topic that I want to highlight is the innovations of existing technology, and specifically within the compliance, risk analysis, and strategy fields. So Nicelle, I know you have some background with technology in risk analysis specifically, and May and I were talking as we were kind of coming up with this, and we would love some clarification on the difference between risk analysis versus identifying the safety aspects for your assignees. We would love to hear on that.
Yeah, sure, Grace. I mean, I think as a global mobility professional, there's always a hard balance between managing, you know, the compliance, risk, and employee wellbeing aspects of the employee's move. And if I think back to, you know, some of the projects that I was managing in my role as the head of global mobility at Cardno, we had some projects in some very unique locations, you know, remote Africa, Pacific Islands, etc. And as part of our process for, you know, putting forward proposals for the projects, or actually understanding if we'd won, whether we actually wanted to send people over there, we not only looked at the tax implications, the immigration implications, but we actually really had a big focus on the safety and well-being of our employees. So is it the right location to send, you know, a foreigner? Are they going to adjust well from a political perspective? Will they fit into the culture over there? Is it safe? Is there too much political unrest? Are there natural disasters, medical issues? So I suppose with the work that we were doing, because it was a lot of foreign affairs work, we had a really big focus on the safety aspects. Not saying that that took the compliance and risk away, but it was balanced. It was sort of, you know, if we've checked the boxes on the compliance, now we need to focus on the health and safety. And one of the things that we did from a technology perspective to support us through this is, if we did decide to move forward with a particular project or send an employee to, you know, say PNG to help rebuild a road after a natural disaster, or, you know, build a school over there to support their education program, we partnered with our international provider to implement an assistance app on all of our employees' phones. Now, this was one of the first things that we did at Cardno as a technology innovation, because, you know, we felt that even though, you know, cost efficiencies and compliance were important, we wanted to make sure that we had a clear understanding of how we could communicate with our employees going to these remote locations, and that they had access to medical assistance on the spot when they needed to.
Absolutely.
So there's lots of providers that can do this, but the partner that we provided, that we partnered with, they allowed us to download an app onto our employees' phones, which allowed the employee to check in at certain intervals within their trip. So say if they went to PNG, they arrived in Port Moresby, they could check in by the time they got on the plane and went to one of the remote locations where they might not necessarily have reception. We at least knew that they had arrived in PNG, and they're, you know, maybe a few days in between, but then they could check in at the next point in time. It would allow us to send messages to our employees through this app as well. So, you know, whether it's check-in messages, notifications, whatever it may be, notify them of security and medical alerts, and any political unrest, because that was quite popular in a lot of the countries. But also, most importantly, it allowed them at one click of a button to contact one of the closest medical providers. So, you know, in each country there was a medical provider. This allowed them at one click to press the button and they could contact the closest medical provider, so that they had access to medical assistance. And that was a really important thing for us, you know, sending our employees to these locations. We wanted to make sure that they were looked after and we knew when and where they were.
Yeah, that's really amazing, because when I think about like medical assistance, those sounds like really emergency assistant, and it sounds like the app has been really helpful and have like all of the services and assistance in one place, so that like in those emergency situations like that, they don't have to jump between like, you know, different tools to contact the companies and then get help. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, it didn't even necessarily have to be an emergency. It could just mean that they've come down with an infection and they need medication. You know, trying to find a doctor in some of those locations is quite difficult, that will actually be able to understand the language that you speak in and prescribe you the medication that you need. So this was just a way of getting to a reputable provider, so that you can get the assistance that you need.
Yeah.
That really highlights the so many like little facets that are incorporated into mobility overall. There's these small things that you might not think of if you're just going on assignment, but mobility professionals have to think about these things because those are the things that can go wrong, or the things that could cause issues for the company. Another question that I wanted to ask and kind of shift the conversation over is, how has strategy kind of changed, and how have you been developing strategy with these technologies? Has there been a change in the position of mobility professionals in the greater scheme of things because of this? So would love to hear comments on that.
Yeah, thanks, Grace. So I think this kind of links back to some of Karen's comments at the beginning around how we used to start with Excel spreadsheets, and, you know, even though some of us still use that, but, you know, we were very old school in not leveraging automation. You know, being able to leverage some of these technology platforms, it allows us to streamline our mobility process, and not only allow us to focus on ensuring our employees are fully supported through the assignment process, but actually focus on strategic work. So really spending the time partnering with the organization, aligning with their business strategy, their business goals, and making sure that we're you know, supporting them through the journey, and, you know, things like aligning to the talent strategy and how we can be innovative and create and align our program to those things. But if I think about how technology can support us in allowing us to have the time to do that strategic work, there are a lot of platforms out there that can automate a lot of the basic administration tasks. And if I think about some of the things that take us a very long time, you know, it's simple things like generating a cost projection and an employee letter of understanding or an employee assignment letter. You know, we often have templates for these letters, but the time you look through the template and you find out where you've got to put, you know, the person's name and their benefits and all of that sort of stuff, it can take quite a long time. And it's also a manual process, so there's errors, or, you know, there's risk of errors. So through these systems, this can actually be generated by having all of your policies pre-programmed in the back end of the system. And it basically means that once you have a pre-approval, you can, at a click of a button, and I say a click of a button, but the way that you have to get it to that point in time is not very easy. But when you get to that point in time, you click the button, and it will populate the cost projection and employee assignment letter for you. So that means that, you know, if you're churning out, you know, 100 plus assignments, you're saving your time with having to do those letters and cost projections manually. It's reducing the errors, and you're actually getting to focus your time on other more valuable, you know, parts of your role, like that strategy work. There's also other parts of things that you can do through these systems, such as automated workflow approvals. So rather than reaching out to managers or finance or, you know, 10 people via email to say, do you approve this move to go ahead? It can be automated through the systems, which is a much easier process to manage. We did, however, you know, thinking about an experience of when I implemented one of these systems, we did, however, get a little bit of pushback from managers on, you know, workflows and approving these things through the system, because with managers in transit, not that that's been a problem for the past 2 years, but, you know, with managers in transit, they felt that, you know, if they got an email, they could quickly sit at the airport or, you know, in the cab or whatever they wanted on their phone and reply to the email to say approved. Whereas through another system, they had to click on a link, go through another system, you know, read, and it wasn't necessarily mobile phone friendly. So I know those things are being improved, but it's just a little challenge that I think we're facing, where people have so many different systems that they have to log into that it's kind of technology overload, and we need to work out how we can simplify it.
Yeah, I agree with that, Nocelle. Like the amount of times that requests for, you know, single sign-on came across my desk, and the push towards getting that from a technology and spend on technology perspective to get it there was, the push for it was huge.
Yeah, but I do understand. I mean, I have a long list of passwords and usernames, and it's hard to keep up with what you do. So single sign-on makes life a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, and it comes back to a comment that Abby made earlier around people want their the user experience within an organization to reflect their personal experience within the apps that they use, right? Like, so now we've all got, you know, if you have an Apple, you've got Face ID that can open most of your apps or your websites that you access. So, you know, he's hoping that that moves into the mobility world too. But, you know, it's right now, well, at least, you know, 5 years ago, it certainly wasn't there anyway.
The technology is certainly moving really fast in a more comprehensive direction. Like you're saying, the user experience is something that the technology companies that are moving into this automation world really want to emphasize. So bringing in Face ID for ease of access into different formats or the different applications is one way to think about it, but kind of pushing all of them together. Do you see a future for that, where the technology companies might push to just have a one application for like all mobility, all encompassing mobility? Do you think there's a future for that?
Definitely. I really do. I think we've probably got a little way to go. But here's hoping. I definitely think it's out there. I think too, you know, now that you know, borders have opened again, mobility is really ramping up, and especially with the remote working side of things, it's bigger than ever. You know, companies are focusing on mobility more than they did, I think, pre-COVID. I think the technology companies, now that they have started in the field, rather than it just being your big four, will definitely get there sooner than we were going to previously.
Amazing.
I feel like to some degree that technology already exists.
Yeah, probably.
But again, like 15 years ago, it may be costly, or organizations haven't adopted it yet because they have an older version which exists within their current model. So
yeah,
it's, but I agree in the fact that, you know, COVID, just like everything else, has massively accelerated the focus and the value around these particular platforms. It's just around us as mobility professionals now getting it in front of the right people to demonstrate the value add. And with health and well-being and safety being such a strong narrative now across all organisations, it's an easier sell than it was, but we still have our work cut out for us to integrate those kind of level of platforms.
Amazing. I'm so excited to see where the technology in this industry is moving to and where it will get to in the next couple of years. And, you know, that is actually a perfect move into our next topic. So what is the future of technology and mobility going to look like? The emerging technologies, the future of AI, and the opportunities for growth. And one of the most interesting things that I have heard was just the implementation of AI technology in the automation sense. And Abigail, hearing about that from you was absolutely fabulous. So I want to give you the floor to talk about that. So.
Yeah, thanks, Grace. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of why we looked at this so you can see what was driving it. And this came from an overall mobility redesign effort that we undertook to understand what the needs of our stakeholders were, so managers, employees, HR partners, and other COEs, and to look at how we could make changes to address some of that. And key things that we were focused on: number one, we wanted to shift to be strategic mobility partners. And we found that we were spending a lot of time on some of the more transactional activities, which were time sensitive. And that meant it took precedence. So more time to focus on strategic activities. Scalability, talked a bit about this at the beginning, needing to scale up in terms of growth and mergers and acquisition activity and so on, as well as down during COVID. The need to do things more simply and efficiently, and optimize some of our processes, and even internal processes, upskilling the team, managing compliance, and so on. And then this pressure on delivering an exceptional employee or manager experience. And those were the key things that we looked at. And of course, as the same, and I think some of this applies not just to mobility, but to many HR activities and other activities. But we, as we looked at that, we weren't going to get additional budget to be able to address some of these changes. We had to be smarter with what we had in terms of resources to deliver on these and have this strategic shift. And one of the things that I identified that would help us achieve some of these is the use of AI to deliver some of the services. So a lot of what we do in mobility is, first of all, you can never account for every activity. One of the things I love about mobility is you don't know what you're going to get on any individual day. And all of us, if we had more time, would share some of the wacky stories of situations that we've had to deal with, which we love. But a lot of the rest of it is actually quite standard. So you need to go through an upskilling of the manager, go through the policies, go through the process. And if you're doing that regularly, you keep repeating the same thing. And you're using man hours to be able to do that. And also and certainly FIS is an example of this, these are large global organizations which have employees in all sorts of locations. And you need to deliver that same service to that manager or the employee, regardless of where they're located. And sometimes, you know, in whatever time zone, but also language. And so trying to maintain a mobility team to cover all of that is challenging. But using AI to create some of these experiences, whether it's training materials, whether it's as part of our journey using AI was to look at actually replacing some of the mobility interactions with AI. And we used an avatar solution to develop Nina, our mobility AI advisor. And Nina's initial role was to help us go through the conclusion of the mobility redesign exercise and manage communications with our HR functions and some of our managers and employees to talk about the journey we'd been on and what would be some of the changes. And then next step is to introduce some of the policy types and overview of the mobility program so that our managers are clicking on and experiencing Nina as if someone's talking to them about exactly what's happening, and still have that sense of face-to-face communication and engaging experience. But on our side, we develop the content once. We know that exactly the right messages are communicated. In using the avatar technology, you can choose what Nina looks like. You can, and Nina's our name. You can choose not only what language does she speak, but also what accent do you want her to have? And is she professional or is she casual in language and so on? And the tailoring of it is really interesting in terms of meeting that experience, having something that's personalized. If I think about the future of technology and the way that the use of AI is going, it's going to become a much more personalized experience. So at the moment, we're controlling Nina. We develop the content for her. They interact with Nina through the intranet page, and we've added on technology so that Nina can not just give an overview, but she can ask you a question. And then a list of multiple choice comes up at the side and the manager clicks on. So, hi, manager, I understand that you're interested in sending somebody on an employee requested move to, which is so great to work at FIS and you have these opportunities. Which region are they traveling to? And the list comes up. Then the manager clicks on it and then Nina talks about the region they've selected. So it's a guided experience. It's not yet, I'm talking to Grace, I can see Grace on the video, Grace asks me a question, I respond. That technology is not there yet to create the responses ahead of time for Nina to communicate. That is I think the next thing that's coming, voice interaction, so that of course the computer is downloading that and searching through a database of responses behind the scenes, but it's a more seamless experience. The other things I think is that Grace, if you're interacting with Nina, should be able to choose on the screen the language, maybe what Nina looks like. What is you could design your Nina avatar for your mobility trip so that you're getting the most engaging experience for you, tailored personal experience. And then after that, the next thing that is already here is used by large companies are holograms. And so you have you already have managers or CEOs who can't travel to a conference, and this is also accelerated during COVID, where the manager or the leader is in their office and they are communicating at the conference and there's a hologram podium, but their image of what they're wearing and all of everything, it's not Nina, the avatar, you've designed her ahead of time, but it's the person talking at the conference. And so I think these trends, and I'm not saying that we need a hologram to replace Nina for delivering this, but these technologies are here. They're getting cheaper and cheaper to use. Nina, it was very cost effective when you think about how much it would cost to hire somebody to deliver all those services, to upskill them, the downtime versus Nina being ready now. And what's required to develop new content for Nina is very cost and time effective. So I think these are some of the exciting things that are ahead of us, and they are not far away when you think about how industry is already using some of those. I think that not everybody is ready for Nina, and we are a fintech organization which is we work in technology. So it's not necessarily the solution. Not everyone will feel comfortable for it. And we, as a result, have other options to engage differently. But I do think that this will become more and more part of the services, not just for mobility, but maybe in other areas of AI. And the other thing I'll just add is that we were on a journey already to digitize everything in HR. We already had our employees and managers using Workday, which is a self-service human resources information system platform. And so that shift to using different forms of technology was also a bit easier. but it also enabled us to leverage everything that's been set up in the human resources system. So it's an integrated experience. And I think that's the other thing that we'll see more of, is the combination and integration of platforms to deliver a more seamless system.
Amazing. The innovations constantly blow my mind.
Yeah, all of the technology just constantly wow me every time I I feel like I learn about a new thing. Like every time I listen to your talk, and those information's really, really exciting.
That last piece, Abby, made me a little bit nervous with the holograms because that will effectively do us out of jobs. So I'm not too sure what I feel about that.
I don't know. I mean, in the hologram example, it's still the individual. In the avatar example, and we created Nina on purpose not to look like any of our team. She was in addition to our team. But our chief people officer has her own avatar that is developed to look like her. And again, lots of CEOs and other senior professionals are using this as a way of trying to reach more people in a personalized way, with recognizing the challenges on the demands for their time. So again, not everyone's ready, and we haven't even talked about virtual reality and that experience yet.
Wow.
But I think that more and more we're going to see this shift towards that. And then the other thing I'll just say is, I think about the challenge that we've got with, again, so much of this is driven by employee experience or a demand for a different type of service. But if I think about the fact now that we have large employee populations who want to work from anywhere, and they've just killed themselves for 2 years during COVID to keep their roles going from home, at the kitchen table, kids around them and all those things. Now they want to come back to, I've just done this, and yes, you're opening the office, but I want that flexibility still, and I prove that I can do my job in that way. So managers, although companies are taking different positions, managers and leaders are going to have to make some decisions around how they enable a certain level of flexibility. And some are saying, work anywhere, and others are saying you need to be in the office, but we'll definitely see this continued demand for flexibility. Absolutely. But there are really smart technology options for how you track and manage these employees. For things like, and we've gone through a lot of different options. We've looked at using the app where the employee has to sign in. We've looked at tracking where they are through their phone. We didn't get a good reception for that. We came up with a different solution to use travel data for business travel because our employees didn't want to track in that way. But one of the things that we were looking at before I finished up was looking at where you log in from your computer and tracking that data, which is, doesn't require the employee to do anything other than accept that the employee, the employer is going to look at where you log in, and use that as a way of identifying your work location, which also helps address things like in the US, you have this wonderful tax system with all of your different states taxing in different ways. And that's a nightmare for companies to make sure they're managing compliance. But this way, again, using a technology identification for where somebody is at allows less time of the individual to ask all the questions and get the accurate data, and enable professionals to manage compliance in a different way. So I think all of that, with such a focus on flexibility and compliance, those two things are opposed ends of the scale sometimes. I think companies need to look at different tech solutions to manage that.
Absolutely. The future of technology is so vast, especially within mobility. And I'm so excited to see how it develops. So I didn't want to cut you off because you were bringing such amazing information, but we have hit the 5 o'clock mark and we've passed it a little bit. So thank you everybody for staying with us a little bit longer. Thank you so much to our professionals for being with us here today. Nicelle, Abigail, and Karen, thank you so much for giving us your time. It was absolutely amazing to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.